We're here to talk about collaboration and impact. Collaborate and impact. And our panel today is going to focus on the collaboration. We're going to be talking about the relationship building of collaboration, that aspect of collaboration between nonprofits and the funders. All right, most of you are in nonprofits, potential grantees, and most of our panel are the funders. So I have, maybe admonished is too strong a word, but I have urged them to keep their advice, relevant for potential grantees. How can each of you in your nonprofits collaborate, build relationships with potential funders? And even when you get a no from a funder, what can you do after that? Our concern is that this is perceived as too transactional. It shouldn't be transactional. Your relationship with potential grantors, potential funders, can be parallel to the work that you do in individual fundraising, in each of your individual programs. Because funders are made up, institutions are made up of people. And we know people fund what they believe in. So how can you build the relationship, keep the relationship strong, even in the face of a rejection, and thereby collaborate with your potential funders, which hopefully will become your funders? It's my real pleasure to introduce our winning panel. Beginning with on your left is Caitlin Mitchell. Caitlin is a program and evaluation officer with Empower, the Emerging Markets Foundation. Their work is around at-risk youth in emerging markets in Colombia, Mexico, and South Africa. Next, moving to your right, Dan Werner. Dan is Social Justice Program Associate with the Arcus Foundation. Their priority is LGBT social justice. Then we have Amy Berman. She's Senior Program Officer at the John A. Hartford Foundation, and their work is around improving the health of older adults. Christine Kang, Associate Program Manager at Project Sunshine. She is our sole panelist who is among you, a part of the nonprofit 501c3 community. And their work at Project Sunshine is direct support to pediatric patients and their families. And Anthony Sanchez, welcome. Anthony is Corporate Social Responsibility Manager at American Express. Their three priorities around CSR are preserving historic places, developing new leaders, and encouraging community service. Each of their fuller bios is outside. Please, let's give a warm welcome to our panel, please. Now, important to know about Christine and Anthony, they could be holding hands. American Express is funding Project Sunshine. So we brought to the panel one team that is actively collaborating. All right, so keeping with what I said is our purpose today, we're going to talk about relationship building. So I'm going to start with the most basic question. I may as well start with Caitlin. Creating strong relationships with funders. Again, for our audience of small and mid-sized nonprofits, how can they? What's one or two ideas that come to mind about creating that strong relationship at the outset, at the beginning of the potential relationship?
One unique thing about Empower is that we strive to and have the opportunity to fund an organization for up to 10 years. And I say that because when we enter a collaboration with a new organization, there is not the idea that the organization is going to do everything perfectly, but there are a few characteristics that are really important to us. The first, I would say, is just honest communication. I've had a number of grantees over it's inevitable that you will have adversity, that something won't go well, won't go as planned. And as a program officer in charge of managing our relationship, the most helpful thing to me and the kind of like star grantees versus ones that are a bit more difficult.
Yeah, we want to be star grantees.
Yes, are just those who
grantees.
communicate, explain that, there are delays in the project, often, most of the time for very legitimate reasons. And in addition to that, not only say, unfortunately, Caitlin, there's been a delay or we weren't able to do this activity, but also have already problem solved around how to either overcome that challenge and or a different activity. So one grantee in Oaxaca, Mexico, the end of their year-long program, which was a leadership training for a group of 20 young people, was to take them to Mexico City. These are young people who had never really been out of the municipality in which they lived. And right before, or a few weeks before, they were supposed to go to Mexico City, there was extreme violence in their community, and a lot of parents rescinded the permission for their young people or their children to go. So 6 of 18 that were planned to go were able to go to Mexico City. And that would be a big sort of like, ugh, what's going on? But when they approached me, they said, listen, only 6 of 18 could make it. We still went on the trip. They still did all the activities. And we did a camping weekend closer to the community in which they live, where 16 of 18 were able to participate. We still went through the leadership training we had hoped for, the themes, the bonding that took place. And they still had that sort of new and broadening horizons experience.
And Caitlin, we're going to have a chance to talk about some examples of impact, so we'll definitely get to that.
Cool.
So basically, it sounds like you're suggesting honesty. If there's tribulations, if there's trouble, let your funder know.
Yes. Boom. Much more concise
Okay.
than me.
I have to. Nonprofit radio. I host this podcast. We got to keep it to an hour, so we're going to concise. Dan, what aside from the being honest about potential problems, adversity, what else can we do? Again, try to look at the outset. Maybe we don't even have a relationship yet. It's up to you, but early on, at least.
No, that's great, and I would echo exactly what was just said. I would also say, from the outset, you're a new grantee, and speaking from the position of the foundation where I work and some of the other foundations that we partner with, I don't want to misspeak or anything, but a new grantee is a new amazing relationship that your program officer is excited about and the foundation is excited about. Another dynamic within foundations is to not overbear or helicopter in and try to add too much burden onto the grantee, because we know that your work is paramount, and we don't want to sit there and constantly be asking for updates, because we know that you'll probably be sending that in a report. So I'd say take the onus and agency to reach out to us and share updates in the interim. We love when we get interim updates. If you're, and I'll keep it quick with this story, we have a grantee out in the rural area of California, and the rural areas of California have more of a kind of economic climate of the U.S. South. It's not all LA and the Bay Area. We get updates about wins that they get at the local school board level and within the local court systems. And we love hearing those stories, and we share them throughout our foundation, and it goes all the way to the board level. So I would just say be open and honest with us, and feel free to reach out, and don't think they're the big foundation black box and we will send them a report later.
Yeah, awesome. Open, honesty, and even reporting when it's not required.
Correct.
Right? You welcome those.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Amy Berman? And by the way, let me also just remind each of you, if you don't have the mic, you can still speak. You'll be heard by this fancy like omnidirectional one. Okay. So no, you're welcome. You should have it. Yeah. Okay. But if you make some quip or something, you'll be heard. Okay. It won't. So keep it clean, because it's going to be heard. It's going to be preserved. Please, Amy Berman. What advice for that starting that relationship real strong?
So I'm going to go to before you're even a grantee, and I agree with everything that I've heard so far. But before you're a grantee, this is your opportunity to really understand who it is you're going to be meeting with. And you should be meeting with the foundation that you want to get to know, or go to an event where you know that they're going to be. And you should know enough about, number one, their mission, the kind of grants that they do, because when you talk about the work that you want to do, it has to fit within the strategy of that foundation. But I'll tell you, even more than that, you need to look at the language on that website. So, you know, you've heard some hints here. You've heard, you know, words like workforce or words like social justice. Use those words in describing what you do. If your work relates to that area, convey what you do and what your interests are within that kind of language and context. That will make it easier for you and the person that you're meeting with, sometimes for the first time, to see where the fit is. Now, maybe the person is going to get where the fit is without you having done your homework, but it's your job to really make that fit apparent. So doing your homework in advance is really helpful. And one thing that I would suggest, the first time that you meet with a foundation, don't pitch an idea. Because that one idea may be the thing that is not within what they can do. Let them get to know you and the range of things that you do. That will be the best entry. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they come in with a very specific pitch. And there are other things that we then didn't get to talk about, and that's the thing that would have been the right fit.
And are you starting to hear the parallel between your individual giving and your potential institutional funding? Who goes into a meeting, first meeting with a potential donor and solicits them? It just doesn't happen. You have to get to know them. So Amy's advising, not only do your research, but very well, your first meeting ought not be the pitch. And again, parallel with your, similar to the work you're doing in individual fundraising.
It's kind of like asking somebody to marry you on the first date.
Yeah, we wouldn't do that either.
That really is what we're talking about.
That's where I'm going
Not
wrong.
agreed.
I realize it. Now I see. Thank
Just to
you.
follow your
It took
theme.
me 55 years to hear that advice. All right, Christine, please.
So for our relationship with American Express and then other relationships, what we've learned is, and I think why we've been so successful, is that as a nonprofit, we try really hard to understand the funder. So, and previously I actually was at a foundation, so I kind of have both lenses too, but it's exciting to have the two perspectives. But I think it's sometimes easy to think of funders as, oh, they have all of this money and power, so I'm just going to go in, and they must be able to do X, Y, and Z. I think there's a lot of assumptions and expectations that come with that relationship. But to think about the relationship from the point of view of how can I be helpful? What is the funder going through? How can we make their lives easier while also maximizing our impact? So it's not just about, I need this from you, I want to get X, get Y, but okay, how can we create a conversation around? So for us at Project Sunshine, we focus on pediatric healthcare. So we always start with the child in mind, but we can't do the work we are doing without our amazing partners, our funders, our corporate partners. And so while making sure that they understand our mission and the work we're doing, to ask them, okay, so then how can we make your life easier? So I think starting from that.
And doesn't that sound like something you would ask, maybe not in those exact words, but parallel, again, in your individual fundraising? What is it about your work, what is it about our work that interests you, that motivates you, that moves you? And what's, in terms of the suggestion, how can we make your life easier? Are there different methods of giving that we could talk about? Maybe a planned gift makes more sense for you. Maybe it's structured over a period of years. Maybe it's a one-time outright gift. Maybe it's a gift of something other than cash, gift in kind, some other kind of asset. So, again, the suggestion, how can we make your life easier? You're always thinking about how you can help your donors to make gifts to you. See these parallels. Anthony, please.
So just to add to what Christine said, I think it's important to set expectations, right? So on the corporate side, I mean, most CSR teams in a corporation is probably a group of 6 to 8 people. At American Express, it's a team of 10, and we're basically responsible for engaging over 50,000 employees. So it's hard to do that, right? So we look for partners who can help us. We can help them with their objectives and to, help with their mission. But on the other hand, we also expect them to engage our volunteers, right? So setting that expectation is important because it's a win-win situation. So we're helping the nonprofit achieve their goals, but we're also engaging our volunteers. So I think setting an expectation up front is super helpful.
And your collaboration involves a lot of volunteer work, a lot of service work by American Express employees. We're going to get to that. That grants aren't only in the form of money by any means. Let's open it up now. We're going to come to questions periodically through our time together. How about questions on this initial round of?
Hi. I was wondering how open funders are to meeting new people, like cold calls, email or phone call. Like, how approachable would you say you are?
How open to new relationships? That's perfect. This is exactly what we're talking about. We're at the beginning phases of the relationship. How open are you to inquiries? Sounds like everybody has something to say. Amy, go ahead. The mic is near you.
Sure. So
take the mic, Amy.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you. It's really important. That's a big part of my job. Yeah, I'm constantly meeting people. My area is around aging. It's around care of older adults. So I am on the road as a national funder. I'm on the road probably almost every week. I am going and meeting with people. They have very easy access to me. If people are committing their life toward doing this work, I'm committing my life toward them because my foundation's mission is to do this as well.
All right.
So I'm completely accessible.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that in our experience, we are one of the largest LGBT funders. So we get a lot of requests from U.S.-based, we're a global funder as well, but from U.S.-based organizations, and we similarly only have a team of 6 or so we just don't have the bandwidth. And one of the things I hate about my job is knowing that me and my team really don't have the bandwidth, even though we have an open initial funding concept submission, so anyone can send them in. We all do look at them, but we don't have the bandwidth to have that special touch and tell people, oh, but this local foundation in Seattle area is doing X, Y, Z. So I would say just keep at people, find out where those funders in those spaces go. When we attend conferences and other things, you catch people in a different mindset. They're not running the meetings, they're not doing their grant write-up. So I would say catching people in different spaces as opposed to the cold call is one avenue you could employ.
Okay.
And I would just say as both a do and a don't is because in Power we are open to hearing from prospective organizations, but do your homework ahead of time and make sure. So Empower supports work in 15 emerging market countries. We say that on our website. We list the countries. Make sure it's a country that you work in is one that we support. We support work with at-risk youth ages 10 to 24. If you're working with the elderly or with children, we are not the right organization. So in general, as Dan was saying, we try to respect our grantees' time, and hopefully the idea would be that then soliciting organizations or our grantee partners will also do their part to respect our time.
Anthony, how about you for that initial?
I would totally agree with that. Obviously, like I mentioned before, it's very hard to, answer every email, answer every inquiry. So doing research, I think our website is really good at providing, as Tony mentioned, we support 3 different pillars, but it's a good place to start because it provides a list of sample projects that we've supported. There's also an eligibility quiz. So going back to what Kate said, it helps you figure out whether it would be a good match or not, because through that eligibility quiz, if you were to select, you're in a place like Arkansas where we don't have a large employee base, that probably wouldn't be a match, because we like to support organizations in specific regions, especially where we have a large employee headcount and our biggest market. So doing research is super important.
Yeah, so you've heard this a couple of times now. So what do we do on the individual side? It's called prospect research. You got to do it on the institutional side too. You don't want to embarrass yourself by, let's say, failing to send a letter of inquiry if that's part of if that's the first step that a funder wants. So don't misstep by not doing your research. Let's move the relationship on a little bit now. We're not at the inquiry stage. We're not at the opening stage. Now we're funding. You've selected a grantee. How can we keep the relationship strong? Now we already heard report when it's not necessary. Keep us involved. You can't repeat your ideas. You got to come with multiple ideas. That's why you're here. We also heard share adversity, tribulations, difficulties along the way. What other advice, again, keeping the relationship strong now that we are funded? Who wants to, anybody could start. Caitlin, go ahead.
One thing that can be a challenge, but I think is also easy to find a potential volunteer for, that really makes a difference for us, is around honestly high quality pictures of the work that you're doing. If you have a really active social media page, and the reason is that we are not an endowed foundation, so we report to our donors about the work that we're supporting. And it's really helpful, and unfortunately some of the grantees that get featured the most are those that have really great documentation of their own work. So not every organization can hire its own photographer, that's for sure, but I think that's a good niche that maybe a volunteer who wants to come learn more about your program, if they have photography skills, could be a really great way just to raise awareness about the work that you're doing. And
can I suggest that maybe it doesn't have to be high production value to be moving and show impact. I've seen cases where people who are benefiting from the organization's work do selfie videos, and with some really simple editing tools, that can be really compelling. So they might go on for 12 minutes or so. That's too long, but I guess the point is, it doesn't have to be high production value necessarily to convey impact. So all right, so use your social media. Obviously, we all know how important video is, how compelling that can be. Storytelling through pictures as well. Let them know what the work is that they're paying for. Please, Dan. You want to pass for it?
No.
Oh, okay.
And I'll keep it quick. It might sound very simple, but I know when I was in very early in my career, a nonprofit that didn't have much of a development office capacity, but now I know, being on the other end, how important. Make sure your funders are on your email list. So when you send out everything about programmatic aspects or big announcements, that all of your funders are getting those updates. That way you can focus on your work, and that way the funders are also updated.
Follow them on Twitter. Follow your funders on Twitter. I mean, it sounds basic, but it might get overlooked. Facebook, fan their Facebook page, et cetera, et cetera. Connect in ways other than what their requirements are for quarterly or semi-annual reporting or something. Connect beyond that. Again, relationship building, right? You're doing it on the individual side. Do it on the institutional side as well. You got something, Amy?
Yeah, I would also.
My wife's name is Amy, so you suffer. I don't know if you like AIM. I'm sorry if I
like AIM
apologize.
too.
Okay.
So the other thing is about your expectation for us. And, you know, it's important that you have an expectation for us. There are people, there are foundations that, you know, everything kind of goes into a black box. When I'm developing a proposal, I actually work with the grantee on the development of that proposal. So I'll edit it, it's not a black box, it's an intentional act. So once we've decided we're going forward, it is a very intentional act. But once you have the grant, the other thing is to consider me as a part of the team. So include us in convenings, invite us. We may or may not be able to go, but we also have the ability to write and speak. I've given congressional testimony on behalf of grantees. You know, we can provide you with more than just grant support. We can actually provide you with elbow grease. We can be helpful to you. We can even bring other funders to the table. So the more you engage with us as a grantee, the more helpful I can be for you.
Excellent examples. Excellent. Thank you. Caitlin, you want to add?
Sure. And I don't know if so
Okay.
I know we've been talking about social media and videos and high-tech stuff. So one of the things, though, that's very helpful, I think, and I don't know if old-fashioned, is just to meet in person. So for Anthony and I had breakfast today before we came here, and we try to make it a point to remember that, like, for organizations, companies, there's a person there that you're talking to who, like, maybe just got married, or so to also build a relationship around the person, not just the institution. So I think that's one piece.
I said earlier, institutions are made up of people. I mean, how plainer can we make the comparisons to your individual fundraising program? It's the same strategy. Keeping informed, inviting. You invite your major donors to things. Invite your institutional your funders. They, like Amy said, they may or may not come, but the invitations should always be out there. They should be getting all your press, all your tweets, etc. You know, I can't drive it home any clearer. Go ahead, Anthony.
So on the corporate side, it's about being, you guys being flexible, right? Because yeah, I can support you through grant making and providing volunteers, but there's also other opportunities. So I always make it, I always make the effort of engaging nonprofits where our affinity groups at American Express, because if you're a woman empowerment organization, there's always a way to connect with employees in other ways, right? So we'll offer volunteers, but we can also bring awareness to our employees, and they can make individual donations through our employee giving campaign or through our Dollars for Doers program, or maybe it's an opportunity for you to come in and speak to a group of women and just bring more awareness. So the relationship doesn't just have to end at grant making. We're always big at expanding that relationship and helping you as much as we can.
All right, this is the time we're going to turn to storytelling. I want to turn to some examples of how these strong relationships have impacted work on the ground. Use any example you like, one of your grantee organizations, and let's start with Anthony and Project Sunshine, and why don't you talk about the work that goes beyond, as you were just saying, the perfect intro, beyond money.
So we started our partnership with Project Sunshine back in 2010, and our biggest challenge at that moment was engaging those. I mean, we're American Express, so we have several call centers throughout the U.S., and it's harder to engage those employees who are, their job is basically being on the phone, being in a call center. So we were looking for ways to engage these volunteers because, let's be honest, most employees want to go out and volunteer, but the challenge is finding the time, right? So not every employee has the luxury of going to a park and planting a tree for 4 or 5 hours. So we thought, why not start this partnership with Project Sunshine, who Christine can talk more about what they do, create these care kits that are prepared in-house, so employees don't necessarily have to leave the office to volunteer. It only takes 1 hour. We started that partnership back in 2010. immediately we got a huge response because, again, people felt like they were able to give back without having to invest too much time. Fast forward, I think 2 or 3 years later, the success of the program helped us build a case to go back to our leaders and say, hey, this is a great partnership. We're engaging more volunteers. We expanded then to other locations. And we've been partners now for 7 years. And we've engaged over 7,000 employees in the last couple of years. And we're now internationally. Last year, we started a partnership with Project Sunshine. So it's finding ways of thinking of all your employee population, right? So those who don't have the flexibility, and I think that's what works well, that Project Sunshine heard the challenge that we were having, and they did a great job at finding a solution for us.
Especially if you're talking to corporations, think broadly. Again, of course, as we said, your first meeting is not going to be the solicitation. You're going to make some inquiry. So after you've done your research on the website, maybe talk to some other organizations that you know they're funding. However you go about your research, especially talking to corporations, you want to think about volunteerism, because Anthony's point is employees do want to volunteer, and that often is a part of what companies want to give. So it's more than the money, especially not only limited to companies certainly, but especially companies. Don't think just about dollars. Okay, so your work is pediatric patients,
Yes,
supporting them and their families.
And their
how are
families.
these sick kids and their families benefiting from this?
Exactly. Great question. So the healthcare landscape is constantly changing, and oftentimes the child, the patient, their stressed and terrified parents, their siblings kind of get missed. And so what we do is mobilize volunteers to really provide and come around the child, the parent, the family, and to treat them the way that if we were the child, the parent, or the sibling, we would want to be treated. And so we do a number of different programs. We provide in-hospital-based parties, bringing the joy of childhood into the hospital setting, letting kids be kids. So that's one part. The part that we work with American Express and a lot of our corporate volunteers with is our Sending Sunshine program. So the Sending Sunshine program really was designed American Express was a big part of that. It's office-based volunteering. So corporate volunteers in their own offices get to assemble these craft kits. So that's like a standalone craft bag that we send to over 300 hospitals and medical facilities. So that you can imagine if you're a child and you just, broke a leg, you're in the emergency room, you're going to be there for 4 hours, and you have a lot of stressed out doctors, child life specialists. They're able to grab these and give them to a child to decrease their anxiety, to decrease their even boredom, to the sibling who may be with them, and the caregiver has a moment to breathe. So that's one of the activities. We also create these things called surgery dolls, which are medical play dolls. And there's research behind them about using these dolls to help empower children to understand the treatment that they'll be going through. And when I first joined Project Sunshine, I was like, does this really make a difference? And the overwhelming answer from our partners is yes. We have a wait list, and so clearly there's a need there. And that the need on the hospital side for these children and families, that it aligns so well with our corporate partners. I think it's amazing, this win-win that Anthony was talking about.
Excellent.
So I think with the last time we checked, over 45,000 children and families received these craft kits or surgery dolls that American Express employees put together. And one recently was around the hurricanes. So we had sent, American Express has a South Florida regional area, and so we had made a bunch of craft kits, sent them to hospitals affected by the hurricane. And we received this amazing phone call from a child life specialist who said, "You saved our lives." So basically, American Express volunteers saved our lives because we received, I think, something like an influx of 150 children and families who were clearly distraught and stressed, and the first thing they did was grab as many of these yellow Project Sunshine bags that our volunteers put together as they could, and went from chaos to calm, and these were her words, chaos to calm immediately.
Yeah. Christine, how did you convey that message to American Express so that they would feel the impact of their work?
So we did have a phone call with Anthony, and we do try to, so we have a great development team that does a lot of social media, and we try to provide photos, reporting, all of the things that we had talked about on this panel, so that we can make sure that our corporate partners feel that. Yeah, so we did, for that specific one, we were on the phone, so I was able to.
And then Anthony, you fed it back to the actual employees who actually were in
And
their
I have
offices
to
doing
say,
this assembly?
it's such a satisfaction, right, on our employees and those who volunteer, because you see the immediate impact, right? So it's not like going to like a community center and painting a wall blue, right? There's really not much impact that you see there. Yeah, you painted a wall, but with these care kits, you know, if 100 volunteers create 1,000 kits, you know that they're going to get to 1,000 kids who need them. So every time I post the Project Sunshine project on our intranet site, it sells out in a matter of like 5 minutes. Like I'll get flooded with emails because again, it's a good way for employees to just donate an hour of their time and see the immediate impact that these kids have.
I can tell Caitlin is burning to add something. So we'll come back. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say this is an example of where that sounds like a phenomenal volunteer opportunity where it's both beneficial and it's a meaningful volunteer opportunity that's beneficial not just for the volunteer but also for the organization. And I just want to say this is one of those moments where feel free to push back against your donor, where if they're really excited and want to send volunteers your way and it's actually going to create more of a headache than be helpful, or if you work in a context where it's not appropriate to have Caitlin as a white 32-year-old American coming in, I'm thinking internationally, but with at-risk youth or more sensitive populations, feel free to say no. Because all too often, I think organizations, especially if it's a donor asking, feel required to take on those volunteers, and sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth.
Okay. Yeah.
I was trying to think of a story that wouldn't repeat some of the themes that we've already heard, and I am reminded of a grantee partner of ours that it was actually the same grantee that I mentioned working in the rural areas of California. They've been a grantee of ours for 3 years, so not like a historic one for us, but not a baby. And we have had an amazing relationship. They send us the updates. We've curated this relationship. We took a tour of the Central Valley of California, seeing all the work that they've done. We brought our CEO, we brought our vice president, we met Dolores Huerta, and we really got to see their work. After that site visit, you can tell that the relationship kind of tipped a little bit. You could tell that we had a shorthand, we had a common connection, and fast forward to 2 weeks ago, the head of the project is doing great work and they're trying to scale their program. We shopped this program director to the Ford Foundation, to the Open Society Foundation, and to an anonymous donor that works in this space. We introduced them to like-minded funders that we know here in New York City because we know that their work is so amazing, in the rural areas of California, kind of far away from big foundation institutions, except for the California Endowment. So that's a story that I love, that I don't think that maybe a lot of grantees would think to say, please introduce us to your other funders. You might think that is an overreach or going past, but I think you can get a read on that relationship once it reaches that tipping point.
That's something I'm sure a lot of organizations just wouldn't even think to do. Introduce us to your other funders. Yeah, we'll come back. Amy, you got an impact story?
I do. I have an impact story. So in the foundation world, the most popular areas to fund are the arts, education, and children. And my foundation does not fund that. In fact, out of 105,000 foundations in this country, only 6 are primarily focused on older adults. So very, very small group of funders that do work nationally in this space. And we really care about creating age-friendly health systems. How are they going to be responsive to older adults, caring about serious illness and end of life, and also about family caregivers. So one of the grants is here in New York City. It's the Center to Advance Palliative Care. It trains people to provide care and make sure that they have advanced care planning, so that their goals are what the care is that they get at the end, that they relieve suffering, they make sure that people have the care that they need when they go through very serious illness, even when they're going to get better from serious illness, to help them get through that serious illness. And so the kinds of impact this work has had, today palliative care is in roughly 90% of hospitals nationally. That's huge. It only came to this country in the 1980s. We have been a long and sustained funder in this space. And we may be slow to warm, but we tend to be a longer and sustained funder around impact. The other thing was there were very few funders that were interested in this space. Does anybody remember the death panel conversations? Okay, well, thankfully we're not having a lot of those today, but there were very few funders that were doing focused work in this area. So I decided I was going to start having calls. This was not with the grantee. This was on behalf of the grantee. I wanted to create a safe learning space for foundations that might be thinking about this. They wanted to learn. And so what's happened with that? We now have a very large collaborative. People are more strategic. They know people that they want to fund. We fund together some things. We fund next to each other in other things. This past year, about $80 million in new funding was in this space. And this is on behalf of the grantee. The grantee could not have had those calls, but it was necessary to begin to bring people into the space. And now they're coming out of the woodwork. We actually did a grant to give somebody money to help coordinate this group, coordinate the calls and everything else. So the impact is huge. The only other thing about this was about 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I had been doing this work long before. This is my area. But then I made a decision, how could I make use of the situation to further help the grantee? So I've been writing, speaking, we've put on congressional briefings together. So any other way that I can be helpful, I am definitely shoulder to shoulder with the grantee.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Caitlin, tell an impact story.
Sure.
And then we're going to come back to you. It'll be Peppermint Lifesaver time very shortly. After Caitlin's got an example.
Yes, and I would just go back to, so Empower can fund your question around like what to do once you're already a grantee and kind of in the medium term, and how it can be really helpful for the relationship. So just to say, one of the key criteria we look for when determining whether or not we're going to fund an organization for a second, a third, a fourth year is this idea around, are they a learning organization? And by that we mean a couple of things. On one, really the most important is, like I said, we don't expect programs to go perfectly. There's challenges that come up. Youth are dynamic and changing, issue areas arise. But really impactful grantees that we have and great relationships and the really impactful programming are constantly learning and adapting and analyzing what went well, what is our strength, what's an area for improvement. And even, again, this same grantee in Oaxaca, Mexico, so in the course of their programming found that the middle school population that they were working with were engaging in self-harm and cutting. And they recognized we as an organization don't have the expertise on this, but they themselves reached out, identified an organization in Canada that focuses on this, and then came to us and said, listen, in our next grant, we would love to include a line item to have training on this to better serve our young people. And with the learning organization, I would just say also openness to feedback. We think, we support programs across the globe and sometimes see similar challenges and best practices. So it's not donor driven by any means. but being open to feedback is really important, even if you don't necessarily take it. And then also with this learning organization comes, which sounds silly, but playing well with others. So we often ask grantee organizations what other organizations are doing great work in their field, and it's a red flag for us if they come back and say no one else is doing it as well as we are, which has happened. And yeah, so I would say being a learning organization, playing well, collaborating with other service providers is something that we look for, and yeah, provides greater impact.
A question occurs to me based on what you and Amy were saying, especially. If you're being funded, what about, so if none of your funders ask, can we meet your other funders? If you're a grantee, what about saying, we'd like you to meet our other funders? What about the grantee putting that possibility together? Is there a downside? We're talking about
None, we do all the time.
Could there be okay?
Yeah.
So the grantee could think of it if none of the funders do. Doesn't seem to be a downside to that, and just a couple of sentences. Don't do this. Your top. Don't do this.
Yeah, the worst thing that you can do is when you have an opportunity to get funding, to listen to the funder about what it is you should be funding. In other words, don't move from your mission. If it's not helpful to your mission and strategy, it's a disaster.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's it.
I'm going to just, I'll answer this from my previous foundation experience. One thing was, don't get angry when you get, when you get defunded. So there was, one of the things that was very difficult was for a funder is to not fund again. That's very hard, I think, I'm sure everyone here knows. And to have to send out a declination is also hard. To have that be met with anger and accusation, not great.
Anthony?
I would say don't go into your automatic pitch, right? Because we have objectives, you have objectives. So it goes just back to what we've been saying, doing research and not just assuming, oh, American Express is such a big company with so much money that we would necessarily support. I'm sure your mission is important, but it might be something that we're not, is not within our guidelines that we would support. So not just going into your pitch and assuming that we're going to support it.
Okay. Dan, don't do it.
Miss deadlines.
Miss deadline.
Yeah, don't miss deadlines. You can ask for an extension. Don't do it 11:59 the day of. But in my over 4 years in philanthropy, I know exactly those organizations that I think are going to fall through the cracks unless our team reminds them. And I feel like that's a perception issue. It happens with individuals. You all know that one person that made a bad impression in your family or at work, and that perception then permeates and then stays. So just have a schedule, have reminders, have your assistants remind you, whatever. But yeah, don't miss deadlines.
Please, there's so many technical tools that can help you, do everything from wake up to know when to go to sleep, and everything in between. So, use the apps, use the tools we have.
One I would say is don't fall off the face of the earth. So we've had some grantees just disappear, and not communicate. And I would say even if it's a one line, again, in Mexico, right after the earthquake, we reached out to grantees, how are you doing? So, we're in the trenches, but thank you for thinking of us, boom. Or, where is your report? I'm sorry, there have been delays. Just keep the communication open.
So please, let's join me in thanking. It's Anthony Sanchez, Christine Kang, Amy Berman, Dan Werner, and Caitlin Mitchell. Please join us. Thank you. I hope you see all the connections between your individual fundraising and your newly invigorated institutional fundraising program.